Welcome to Season 4 of the NAC 4 Business Podcast.
Sponsor mention. If you're thinking about building wealth through real estate and business assets, the Property Wizard podcast breaks it all down in plain language. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts. Search for the Property Wizard podcast. Link in the show notes. Question of the audience. What are the biggest financial risks your business is ignoring has everything to do with your balance sheet? Most leaders know climate change is real. What they're still trying to figure out is what it costs them when they're doing nothing. Today's guests are helping organizations turn that uncertainty into a competitive edge, and they're going to show you and us actually exactly how. So we have two guests here today, and Nidhi Nikum. She's spent her career at the crossroads of climate and finance. She's worked inside banking, energy, and infrastructure, helping organizations measure risk, find opportunities, and build a path to net zero that actually fits how they run their business. She's an advisor in climate risk intelligence, a company built to turn climate data into financial decisions. She believes the next 70 years belong to energy, and that the companies who get ahead of that now will be the ones still standing later. When she's not reshaping how leaders think about risk, she's growing her own food on a community allotment like that. You can find her on LinkedIn. Her handle is NID, all in one word, on LinkedIn. And our other guest is Ellza Malok. She's the Chief R&D Officer at Ampresta. Her background crosses behavioral research, marketing, and data science. Her focus is on one thing, turning complicated data into something leaders can actually use. She studies how incentives shape decisions, especially when the stakes are high and the information is messy. She's the kind of thinker who questions the assumptions everyone else accepts. She recently reminded herself that curiosity does not kill the cat. The full saying is that satisfaction brought it back. That is how she approaches her work, and you can find her at ampresta.com, and it's spelled AMPRESTA.com, or connect with her on LinkedIn at Ellza Malok, ELLZAMALOK. Ladies, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here. Ellza, do you have a favorite quote or saying you want to share?
So my favorite quote is by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It goes, every individual is a unique expression of a collective conscious woven into the fabric of society. And I'm such a big believer in how we impact each other dynamically and how that informs information. And I've known this quote for over 25 years at this point, and it still resonates before I even got into behavioral science. So it's one that kind of sits actually on my board because it resonates so well.
Nidhi, how about yourself? Do you have a quote that just goes, aha, here we go?
Not a quote, but yeah, I strongly believe that next 70 odd years are all dedicated to energy and energy alone. And there was once a time when information technology sucked away brains from all other sectors and brought talent under one roof. What has that led to do is what we're seeing in AI. That was the starting point of bringing everybody into IT. And I think now is the starting point of getting everybody in the energy sector, I would say, because the next 70 odd years are dedicated to building all the fundamental new ways of not only generating energy from renewable sources, but also from low carbon energy and the energy transmission and distribution systems. And obviously, the most important of all, the battery storage solutions. And I think it's going to be a very STEM related field going forward. So if any of your audiences are hearing this, I would say build your career in energy.
Wow. Battery storage, I think, is going to be the big one. Creating it, but also keeping it too. What brought you from finance into climate? Like, how did that kind of those crossroads line up for you there, Nidhi?
Thanks for this opportunity, Bernie. I've worked in banking especially in the credit risk space, especially in institutional lending. And that sort of teaches you a few things, You learn a lot of horizon scanning for risk and emerging threats and opportunities. I ended up also working in digital transformation within the financial services sector, which brought me very close to the data pipeline and how the data tells you the performance of a company. And looking at data, it almost makes you a good soothsayer. And for banks, climate risk is not a separate category. It sort of manifests through what we hold on our balance sheet. So if you look at physical risk, which is damage from extreme weather events, and transitioning risk, disruption from moving from the current setup to a low carbon economy, all these risks will transmit through a bank's balance sheet, for example, through a credit market liquidity and operational aspect, And I am very close to it because I not only sat in the risk roles, but I also sat in the frontline roles within institutional lending. And traditionally, within the financial system, risk is a very back office activity, whereas climate risk is not. It's a very frontline mandate because it all centers around making better decisions so that you don't build more risk on your balance sheet. Especially if that risk has got huge externalities, because all of this you cannot control by sitting in one office in a location. So I see that same sort of vibes in the infrastructure sector as well. So any high frequency intense weather events like floods and fires, wildfires, they cause immediate damage to the collateral that you're building in the infrastructure sector. It impacts your corporate supply chain. Climate risk is such a horizontal uh, sector agnostic risk that it impacts you in a way that its impact should be read directly into the finances of any corporations. And that sort of felt like a very organic growth story for me personally, that because I understood risk and I understood capital markets, it was very original for me to then start working in climate risk space so that I can potentially change the climate change story. It does not feel like a good PR or a CSR exercise, but it really feels like addressing of the biggest challenge that we face today.
Wow. I can totally appreciate it because what is it? Some people have doubts about climate change still. And at the end of the day, if the light switch is not on in the room and it's dark outside, it's still dark, right? So it's the hard realities. Elza, now you're at the other end of a spectrum where the finance is almost like in like the science. Not that behavioral research isn't science, but you usually when you're dealing with people, there's kind of fuzzy logic almost embedded into that space. What brought you into this space and into the climate sphere at the same time? And I'm suspecting I kind of know, but you know what? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's always interesting because one would think that behavioral research has very little to do with climate risk. But behavioral research is how we all make decisions. It's the science behind how we choose whether or not to go into a decarbonization initiative or not. And I think from the collective group here at Ampresta, we all have this mission of we need to move this because it's not only going to cost us a lot of money, but it's going to hurt our planet and hurt many, many people if we don't change. The issue is that the behavioral incentives aren't there. And that's really where my research plays and my background plays into it. It's blending. How do we get the information that from someone like Nidhi and then turn it into a behavioral incentive model for businesses and those that are working in businesses to make those decisions every single day and translate that into something actionable that drives the behavior change that we really need.
Again, that's kind of figured that's where that was going, and and it makes a lot of sense. So when I hear other people talk about sales, right, it says they ultimately comes down to an emotive decision at some point in time, even if you have hard facts. Much like if you have a teenage male and you go, "Do you want the red sports car?" and you're 16, the answer is, "Uh-huh, yes I do." Right. So how do you get that dopamine hit, but at the same time, and convincing somebody that might not be, their alignment's not in that space, their headspace, not that they're against protecting the environment against climate change, but their headspace isn't in there. How do you get them there? I mean, you can go high, your insurance rates are going up, and how do you do the reward mechanism? And it might be oversimplifying that, but how do you get them to kind of get into that headspace?
So there's kind of an arc of patterns that most people go through, and it's different for the individual versus the collective. And our model is definitely to get a collective to move, but you've got to move a handful of individuals. So you're going to get the early adopters, the ones that already buy into this to move forward. And once they start getting a competitive advantage in the market because they've de-risked, then you're like, well, what are they doing? So it becomes less of a conversation. And this happens often that we see in sustainability. It's this corner, nice to have department that when push comes to shove gets defunded because maybe the numbers don't look right this year, et cetera. When you put in a balance sheet, it becomes a fiduciary responsibility to the leaders in an organization. It changes the way that the lens that you're viewing it from to say, oh, It's not if I want to keep this plant running, it's is this plant at risk for the next earthquake that may hit and thus ruin it because we're seeing more natural disasters every day than we have in past years. So it flips the script on how you view it. So rather than making it a sustainability conversation, it becomes a financial duty to de-risk your organization.
One of the other things I find sometimes, if you don't know, you don't know. So I think from your end of the spectrum, it's the hey, listen, your bank's going, or better yet, your insurance company going, yeah, no, no, or you're paying a lot more, or almost the value of replacing everything now. How does a person find out? Oh, their goodness, I'm putting myself at risk. Like, is there yeah, AI monster sitting in the background? You're going, you type in this stuff here, your coordinates on the planet Earth, and this is what I'm doing for a living, and out comes your risk factor is whatever it is, right? And which starts the conversation going, Now how do I kind of rectify this?"
On the individual level, there's,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
but if you're the CEO, for example, right, and you're sitting in the boardroom, or if there's a strategist working with your CEO, because that's not their gift, right? And someone sits there and they function as the oracle. Where are we going next, right? How, but they might not know a bit of information. They know there's a gap. How do they fill that gap? Is it a platform where they kind of plug a number in and plug in some background information, or is that where Ampresta comes into play?
I think there's significant gaps in the market. But before I talk about the gap, I think it's because a lot of people know the gap exists, but not all of us can solve for it. So it's important to mention that when you meet like-minded people and you form a tribe, you're at a better success rate of solving for a gap. That's a given. That's why you see the group here who are obsessed with solving for the gap. It's very important. So before we go outside the world in this preacher mode, we have to be within our tribe, be sure of the key things that A, we are not romanticizing the problem itself. B, this is not a hypothetical problem, and neither it is an intellectual high for us. It's a very real and a very material problem. And we would like to make this climate risk less abstract so that the business decision makers can consume it and make better decisions. And those decisions will reflect directly onto their balance sheet. So we endeavor to bring things together which will start showing the impact that climate risk is creating on your balance sheet, profit and loss, and cash flow statements. Make it very financially clear. What we will do through this is we would like to make the ground fertile for other sorts of mitigation efforts to land for the businesses. The businesses want to do the right things, but they're running in 6 months to 1 year financial engine, final returns, return on interest, return on investments. So we need to convert the information in that format that they can consume to what I said, make the risk on their business appear less abstract and more like a target number that they can do something with. So we are going to be the enablers to make that happen and not do what others are doing, which is creating more reporting burden, I would say. Right, Ellza?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of it is I'll use a really good example of how our carbon performance scorecard operates in the real estate space. There's a lot of unknowns, even though the real estate space actually has a good chunk of data. It has financial data, it has insurance risk data because they calculate a lot of that. But it's all reporting. Nothing is put together in a financial model that an asset manager can be like, these are the buildings I need to go, work on because they pose the highest risks for, deterioration in a particular area, et cetera. And then for us to give you a monetary number of some of those potential savings across insurance, across retrofitting, and just across de-risking that asset from getting undervalued, that is where Nidhi's talking about it becoming tangible. So now you have the information in the language that you speak as an asset manager or a chief investment officer to say, okay, these are the priority buildings that perhaps generate me the most amount of revenue, but are eating up my profits because of X, Y, and Z, and I can capture some of that profit by doing these investments. And as Nidhi said, most of these organizations run in shorter periods. So for us to give you short-term goals, midterm goals, and long-term goals and prioritize those, that's really what our initial product, the Carbon Performance Scorecard, does. It gives it to you to say, this is the language that you speak. We've just translated it for you.
Having been involved in a corporate space and the annual budget and going through, so Nidhi, I totally understand what you're saying. What are we doing this year, and what's the capital expense and operating expense, and and I'm not an accountant, but I learned pretty quick what works well.
Yeah, those are the terms. That's what we're talking about. And thank you.
We did an ROI for a project to put solar panels on a roof of a building, and the CFO at the time, he says, "What's the what's the return on investment? Is it 3 years?" I said, "That's 12." He went for it. We went forward with the project, right? And it's interesting. Previous conversation, same building. Someone suggested from a government agency we should put a grass roof on top, and the VP at the time goes, "Yeah, no, we're not doing that." Subsequently, I had a chat with somebody who does design, and she says, "You know what? You never want to put grass on the roof if it has other implications on carbon, right? For the carbon offsets." So when you're doing a brown build or a refit versus a new build, is there kind of an aggregator going, I have these really great ideas? It could be the grass on the roof, and it might make sense under certain circumstances, right? And this was a 15-story structure, so it's way up there. People were joking with me, going, "Yeah, you're gonna have goats on the roof or what? To mow the lawn?" Well, then we'd sell goat milk, right? Um, is there a listen, I have all these great ideas. I want to do this project, and I'm about to do either a launch of a new product or a launch of a new building, a new structure, a new series of structures, or even a supply chain. Is there something that can aggregate going, okay, that looks really good, but it's not going to help you at the end of the day. It's going to cost more and cost more, not just in money, but also in impact. Is there something that kind of a sorting hat that makes going, okay, these things come together well? Like, you don't make oysters and peanut butter happen typically, right? When you're making a sandwich, right? Is there a kind of a perfect mix that blends things? Open to either of you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually, Bernie. And this is what real asset managers deal with, what they currently have versus what they're going to build. So here's an interesting fact that by 2050, where all the built up world should have been decarbonized by, most of the buildings are already built. So they need to decarbonize process now in order to go to net zero by 2050. What does that mean? It means that you have annually that much money to spend. So you need to prioritize which building retrofitting do you need to do first. But in order to open the purse strings and start spending money, you need to have a baseline of how much does it take to decarbonize a certain building, which means do you even know how much is the current embodied and operational carbon impact or footprint of a certain building? When was the last time you did anything to upgrade any of the infrastructure which related to energy consumption and escape of emissions from a building? How is the water management and the waste management, which contributes to a lot of these greenhouse gases? So those then become strong data points, and our model will tell you which is the asset that you need to focus on when. So it sort of takes away that decision making around, oh, I've got all these 120 buildings in my portfolio. Where do I start? Well, we'll tell you in the next 3 years, focus on these. And the year after, focus on those. And on the immediate ones, probably they're going to be stranded assets. So hence, try to think of getting rid of them in due course in time. Because one of the things that is parallelly happen, and Ellza knows a great deal about this, is the carbon risk on taxes increasing day by day. How much a building produces from in terms of its emissions on embodied carbon and operational carbon has a direct impact on how much taxes you'll pay for keeping that asset in your portfolio. And that's a strong reality. You obviously know that you have got only limited amount of funds to spend on retrofitting something. You need to plan it accordingly. Platform allows planning capability.
Yeah, and as far as like specific tactics, are there standard ones? Kind of like I'm assuming you're kind of getting to the like lead or any of these other standard practices. It really depends on the region, the type of building, the type of asset, etc. The beauty about the model is that you can kind of enter that information in, and then you can say, "Ah, this is what gives me the maximum impact in the period of time," as opposed to investing in it and then hoping for the best. You can kind of pre-plan, as Nidhi's talking about, and say, this is what I'm expecting, and work with your chief sustainability officer or your sustainability team and say, these are the things that we want to prioritize. Let's find the best partners and providers for these services. And they may have new technologies that the system can then kind of say, well, the average is X, but this provider does better than X. Now your numbers are better. It gives the people who are making these decisions the control and the ability to say, yes, these are the assets I'm working on. And then this is the blend of decarbonization solutions I'm going to put into it. And one building may look completely different from another, just depending on what type of solution is being embedded into it.
You said something interesting, a chief sustainability officer. So is that what you folks do? Then you become the fractional option of that. Is that something that's prevalent? Do you see that happening a lot? Do you see is it only large corporations, but it's kind of like to other people, it's a gap that they don't know they have?
No, that's generally a hat. Sorry, that's generally a hat that someone wears in a corporate setup. If you start breaking it down to smaller setups, you won't even have a CSO, a chief sustainability officer. You generally have a handful of people who are in the C-suits. We don't exclusively talk to CSOs. Our product will, the platform will not. It will talk to the C-suite, the more decision makers like the CEO and the CFO. Ideally, yes, the CFO should be looking into the outcomes of the platform. Chief sustainability officers have bigger sustainability mandate, but they may not always have the purse to spend the money. And our platform goes knocking on the door of people who are the money decision makers.
Yeah, it definitely enables the CFO to make the decision. And the chief sustainability officer is more around the how. So once you get to how are we gonna we've decided to decarbonize this particular asset or our company as a whole, this chief sustainability officer has this wealth of knowledge on how to make that happen. But you've got to make the C-suite, specifically the CEO and CFO, have to commit to it mentally first before you get into the how.
Okay, Elza, how do you look at him and go, look longingly and deeply into my eyes and follow my trance? How do you bring them there? I know you don't do that, but because it's all, it's the behavior, but how do you bring them into that light?
Well, I mean, one of the easiest ones is you make it part of their responsibilities. And if it's already an existing responsibility, like chief financial officers almost always have the de-risk responsibility, the risk mitigation responsibility. If this now says, I have a blind risk that I wasn't aware of before, because I thought it was just a reporting mandate to the government where I had to fill this out. And that was, that's a responsibility of the chief sustainability officer. But now I realize my influence impacts that. And I could save X amount of dollars, or I could de-risk my organization that potentially saves me on insurance, helps me save some or recoup some of that profit. Now I have control over it because it's my fiduciary responsibility to make this organization as profitable as possible. Or if I'm the CEO in that suite and I'm saying, oh, well, we didn't invest in X, Y, and Z, and now we're potentially missing a market that my competitors are already tapping into. Now it becomes my responsibility. So that's really the heart of Ampresta is it monetizes, it reframes how climate risk is viewed as not this climate risk and decarbonization are always going to be do good initiatives. There's just also a profitable initiative. And there's that blind gap that a balance sheet doesn't show.
As you're mentioning this and you're going, hi, you're doing a good thing, or it's a profit in the balance sheet. Is there a ripple effect of other outcomes that are that may not be, it won't translate well. It'd be like when you're meeting somebody for the first time and, you can stand up and you can stare at two faces and they'll go, hi, my name is, right? But if you smile, right, it helps, right? There's a ripple effect that happens from the communication. Do you find that there's a ripple effect when a company has done and going, "Hey, we can do this, and it's gonna help us with our finances, and, we're not maybe prevent the, do the butterfly effect. We're not gonna have a typhoon or a hurricane roll through here." But are there other more, uh impacts that surround the whole space of that business that aren't measured
Yeah,
that
I
way?
think, yeah, I would like to definitely answer this one because, like I said, we need to make these abstract nature of this risk to something like a hold on to things, right? So, if I take an example of how does, um, let's start from a place of, the relationship between the GDP versus the greenhouse gas emissions, and how does that impact directly to a company, how it performs. A structural economic shift of reduction to greenhouse gas emissions can happen because emissions intensive industry needs to decide on two things. One is reduce the energy intensity and lower the carbon intensity. What does that mean? In layman's language, it's you need less energy per unit of GDP. That's energy intensity reduction. And lowering carbon intensity is you use less of the current fossil fuel based energy, which means you use better and cleaner energy sources. Why? Because the carbon pricing or carbon tax is the strong levers that the countries are using to decouple the GDP with the greenhouse GHG emissions. And why do I talk about this? Because I take one of the examples from global north, which is Sweden. Sweden is using very ambitious policy around carbon taxes to support this decoupling effect. So the countries are already demonstrating feasibility and increasing prevalence of this transition to the cleaner modes of economic activity. The companies cannot be left behind, right? So why do I say that? Companies operate in these countries, right? So how do they become more sustainable and get to their profitable goals? So in that context, now if we talk about energy, energy actually has moved from facilities management to the boardroom because it directly impacts the financial performance of the company, the operational continuity of the company, and the corporate reputation. If there's a sudden price spike or there's a supply interruption, that can erode your margins overnight. And increasingly, both your customers and investors expect credible decarbonization strategies. So energy is no more cost project. And things related to any retrofitment that we're talking about in a asset is no more a cost project. It's a value driver. So what do the companies need to do? Companies, in order to see the ripple effect of making these good changes, they need to build strong data visibility and have digital optimization of how much do they consume, when do they consume, and from what sources of, for example, energy do they consume. They need to build tangible response mechanism to reduce their exposure to peak performance of pricing of around energy supply. Uh, Especially the energy intensive sectors, they have the leverage to build on-site energy production and battery storage. There's another interesting thing around just on the energy side of thing that the gas prices are high and the gas turbine is under supply. So if you look at the horizontal scanning of this impact, change is coming. So organizations have to increasingly invest in some sort of digital optimization platforms and the ability to connect all the data points and generate solutions for them to maintain their operational independence and also meet at the same time these tightening things around sustainability and carbon reporting requirements. And yes, I mean people may say, it's not our core business, but I'll say businesses are doing it and they need to be shifting from this passive consumption to the active energy trading sort of mindset, treating electricity flexibility as part of a strategic asset rather than fixed cost. And when you start looking at, well, what is my strategic asset versus what is my fixed cost, I think your perspective around solving more of the things changes and you get onto this bandwagon of decarbonizing if it helps.
Elsa, I get the financial picture. I get the impact point. Is it is the decision that people are making from a business perspective, is it fear-based or is it a feel-good basis? Which is stronger? At the end of the day, what makes the bell ring the loudest? And I see the light. Let's go this way. Or whatever it is, or the fresh wind.
Behaviorally, in businesses, fear based or risk based decisions are the ones that are made first and always kind of the knee jerk reaction. It's one of the reasons why anytime, and you see this in B2B all the time, if you lead from a opportunity mindset, you're only going to get those that have an opportunity But most businesses, especially if a CFO is signing off on something, they lead from a de-risk model because their shareholders require them to think that way. They are the last stop when it comes to financial failure of an organization. So that's always a component of it. It's the reason why we're starting with risk first and not opportunity. But most organizations today operate from a risk mindset as opposed to an opportunity mindset, especially the bigger ones where they've gotten big enough that failing is not really an option. We see that with Spirit as they were too big to fail, but then the problem just became too big for them to even handle. So those are some of the things that we bake into our behavioral incentives when we say this is the carbon performance scorecard. In the future, as our organization grows and our product line grows, we will work on here's some low hanging fruit of opportunity capture or value creation if you're in the private equity space. But we always are going to start with risk because people make decisions on or have a reactive emotion to de-risking something, not losing something, as opposed to gaining something new.
Polycrisis mode. Nidhi, are we in a polycrisis mode globally? And what is a polycrisis?
Bernie, polycrisis means so many things getting together and spoiling the party, actually. There's obviously carbon emissions as a giant big problem. Then there's depletion of natural resources and nature as such. And then there is the third part of it, which is, it's called prior polycrisis. The third one is huge amount of pollution that we're dealing with. You know how we talk about microplastics, that it's everywhere. It's in the placenta now. So it's too intrusive and too abrasive. But this is also a very numerical thing to measure, actually. What does that mean? A polycrisis means that there's a constantly so much entropy in the system because the system is failing and the resistance to maintain the status quo is so high, creates more entropy. So we are in the self-feeding loop, we sort of are not able to break out of it. And if you pick up on the uncertainty index currently, and there's an index which is monitored in the world, it's through the roof. It's through the roof last year, it's through the roof this year. So what does that mean? In such a world which is very hard to predict and the externalities are too wide, I would again draw down to the same conversation around when so many things are going wrong, you have to come back to the basics. Decouple your biggest source of crisis, which is emissions, from the very economic activity that we do. Because we are a very energy hungry planet. What would never change is our desire to use more and more energy. But how we use that energy, from where does that energy come, has to change. And that can only happen if we use the levers of reduce energy intensity, reduce the carbon intensity, so that the business operations can be free from this pressure. If you sort of lift the hood in a business situation, you need to understand what underpins these operations to make them profitable. And that's the thing which we try to solve for. As I said before, to make the risk mostly, which is a bit of an abstract thing, we want business to address that which is not so abstract. So we convert that risk into a favorable cousin, which is less abstract, which is like Ellza spoke earlier. If I tell the business that the income is disappearing, it'll get their required attention, right? Because now there's a number, there's a source for it, and there's a target position to go to. Climate risk actually gives you a lot of levers around cost efficiency and avoidance of problems so that you can get out of this polycrisis mode. You cannot continue to function as a business how you did for so many years. And time is against us in this. But unfortunately, the world has started solving for this problem from a reporting perspective. Now tell me one thing, if you're driving a car and this problem is in the engine, and equate that to the core of the business, you would want to open the engine itself, but not look at the tailpipe, right? And the tailpipe is a euphemism I'm using for reporting. We're telling the entire business world to start reporting. Yeah, that's great. You need to report, but before reporting, just don't do a tick box exercise. Go and measure the things which this. There are two things in materiality. One is what you as a business do create an impact on the world versus what the climate change is doing an impact on you as a business. That's the core essence of trying to understand what you should spend your energy doing. You know, especially in this conversation, when we talk about Ampresta, we are not in the business of this archaeological fact-finding mission that we tell you what all is wrong in your balance sheet when you're already buried. We intend to give you calculated profits and losses based upon what we measure for you so that everything is very tangible. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get out of the polycrisis mode. You will continue to feed the same systematic things which are systematically wrong, the perceivable future. But you know what, Bernie? We all need to not just solve for big, profound problems because it looks like a big challenge, but also because we need to become good grandparents. We need to leave enough on the table for the future generations to have an affordable life on this planet and not just consume everything in one go the way we are running. And all of this lies back into how the businesses run in this world. We create so much of economic productive outcome, and we are brilliant at doing that. And we can actually do it in a more profitable way, choosing the sustainable way. And to do that, we bring in the climate risk intelligence into your decision making skills. Because once you see that target number, you cannot just close your eyes and say, no, I'm against this. This is an ideological difference. It's not. That's a number on your balance sheet. You cannot not make anything about it.
Ellza, one of the things I'm understanding from Nidhi's comment, it's a legacy, right? So, if I plant grass seed, in the spring, I'm bound to see it, and I have to cut it by, mid-May, mid-June here in Canada. But if I plant an oak seed, right, the tree, it'll be long term in coming. And 80 years down the road, it'll be there. It'll be, assuming there's rain, there's sustenance and so forth. How do you get people to change that mindset? It can be the CEO, it could be the CFO, it could be the C-suite, or it can be, hi, I'm a solopreneur, I'm starting. What do you suggest for them to get their headset wrapped or their mindset wrapped around that construct, that going, yes, I have an immediate goal. And the ripple effect is, 20 years, 30 years down the road, I'm not leaving a stain, I'm leaving something that's growing.
Yeah, I think it's because our financial metrics are run on such a short-term model. As Nidhi said, if you can bring that polycrisis analysis paralysis mindset down, and now you have a sense of control, the idea of looking for legacy becomes much easier because you're not tackling problem after another. If you are a business that has maybe multiple plants and one got hit by a tornado, like we know has been happening a lot here, and I'm in Chicago, so the Midwest is riddled with them. Another one has been flooded because of a hurricane, etc. You're just dealing with crisis after crisis, and you're constantly in that high cortisol level, even as a person. You're just like, yet another thing. But if you have control over that, like we are going to do X, Y, and Z, these very tangible things, you actually now have the opportunity to think about legacy as opposed to right now where many of them are just in such a crisis mode that they can't think about legacy. It doesn't give you the option. It's the equivalent of, a person being homeless and then they're going to be like, what am I going to do for my grandchildren? I'm just trying to think for today and how to get to a shelter. That's the level that we're trying to kind of work through. And we want to create space for that legacy thinking as opposed to just having this. And a lot of sustainability initiatives do that. They have this wonderful, amazing idea of where the future could be, but it's very romanticized. And for us to get to tangible, we have to kind of crawl before we can walk, before we can run. And that's how our model is built, is like, this is what you get today. And then in the future, you can think a little bit more midterm. And then after that, you can think super long term. You can think about where to plant the oak trees, but you got to plant the grass first. We've got to have some fertile area for you to think about as opposed to, fire after fire, especially if you are in that C-suite where we live in a very uncertain area, very uncertain times, where you're constantly planning how to mitigate that. If you have one more lens to look at, like, oh, okay, I'm going to mitigate these 3 pieces of risk through these solutions because I have a clearer understanding of how my balance sheet works with climate intelligence. That gives you the space to think about it.
So, a question to the both of you then. New technology, new ways of making things better. And usually, depending where you're in the spectrum, like if you're 15 years old and you grow up with a product as it evolves, you know the ins and outs of it. But if you've never grown up with it, or it has its own implications. Whether you're talking about batteries, for example, right? Car batteries that are an EV vehicle, if it catches fire, not so good, right? How do you get the people, whether it's the CEO or the solopreneur, okay, here's a new option. Might be a good thing, but how do I know it's a good thing? And what do I look for risks? Because it's maybe something I've never managed before. It's like if you own a gas furnace and you own a fireplace, they both generate heat. They have risks attached to them, but they also have things you have to be mindful of. How do you bring that awareness into the choices?
I think that's a brilliant question, Bernie. And I want to sort of step back and say this is already happening. So just said, I think bring the awareness to the folks to what actually the market is already doing. And I'll tell you two grand nuggets around it. We need a lot of energy on this planet, right? And we need to go from 53 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions to net zero. Okay, that's the equation we are trying to solve globally. Energy sector is the biggest emitter of that, more than 73%. And we use energy for 5 to 6 key areas, which is energy production itself. Making things, we use an electricity to make most of things like cement, steel, aluminum, plastic, and everything. Growing things like plants, industrial level animal keeping for meat production. Going around the place, which is transport. Keeping the ambience warm, cool, freezing, so HVAC in homes and industry. We definitely need different kinds of sources, ways of production of electricity. And that's what we're going to do in the next 70 years, implementing them to solve the current crisis. But is it all doom and gloom? No. And why people are not aware about it is a very crucial thing. I do not know how to solve for this, but I can tell you that clean energy market is a now growth story. And I'll tell you quick numbers around the patents being filed, because I think all C-suits understand the number of patents being filed, right? And China is a leader here. Notably, three things. State Grid Corporation of China is the leading filer in ESG and renewable energy patents I'm talking about. A German company, Siemens AG, that holds the most renewable energy patents in the global power and utility sector. And then there's a battery component, which is around a company called Contemporary and Bricks Technology, which has got filed more than 2,200 of the patents in rise of the battery technology. Then there's solar dominance. 62% of the patents filed are in solar technology space. So that's like booming massively. And then comes wind energy, both onshore and offshore. Did you know that? And again, China holds close to more than 900,000 worth of patents are being filed, all being commissioned for a solution. And then there is Huawei and Seattle again filing lots of patents in the batteries and energy storage. So this engine is already churning so much outcome that it's ready, market ready for consumption. It's just a matter of time where this becomes a front page news. So I think the question we are asking here is, why is this not a front page news? That is beyond my thinking here, why it's not a front page news. But that is a good news in all the things that is about doom and gloom. We are a very intelligent species on this planet, and we are doing a lot of it to protect and safeguard our future. How that comes out to the rest of the world is the thing that we're deeply interested in. And hence, building something that sort of puts all of that information at the heart of why you should solve for this is the game changer. And one of the things that we intend to do through this platform.
And I think part of the process is, as these technologies come to play, understanding the risk between having a solar panel that you have to maintain and your existing energy output, or whatever mix of sustainable energy that you're producing, is part of our benchmarking process. So in my role as the R&D, having a consortium of solutions where we can benchmark their success rate is part of the process. So to say you're one of X organizations that are already using this technology, because there are other areas in the globe, like China, that are far more advanced than us in many ways in terms of energy output, that we can use that information to say, here's where your benchmark would fall if you were to choose X technology versus another. And having that mix, as I mentioned, everybody's going to have a slightly different mix because of their needs, their budget, the timeline they're expecting it to occur in. So it's going to be in the model, which is the more advanced solution that we're working on building. But that's the whole point is if you can compare, it's kind of like, a credit rating. If you can compare where you fall in terms of everybody else, and then your 3 or 4 levers to improve your credit, that's kind of how our model is going to work to say, all right, well, these solutions will increase by X, but they come with other risk, right? So you're never going to be risk zero because it's just impossible. But we will be able to provide you at least some information around perhaps this tool doesn't work in California because of X, Y, and Z. Or, it's fading out because of the mercury output or the cobalt leakage that may occur. Just like every other innovation since the industrial kickoff, we're going to have our learnings. The point is, though, we are moving at a more accelerated rate, that the learnings are going to come a lot faster than they were 100 years ago when information was sent through telegram.
Or a carrier pigeon.
Yeah.
Ladies, I want to say thank you so much. And, to our listeners, connect with Nidhi and Ellza at ampresta.com. That's spelled AMPRESTA.com. And if this conversation has tweaked your interest in how you can improve your business and how the overall operation can be improved, whether it's you coming in from a opportunity mindset or a oh my gosh, I gotta cut corners and efficiencies and risk aversion, reach out to them. They can meet your needs in this particular space. I want to say a big thank you to Subi Joseph, who's the CFO and also involved with Ampresta, and making the introduction between Nidhi and Ellza to the Knack for Business community. So again, just to remind you, if you're looking for having success to something that's coming to you, whether you want it or not, you want to stay competitive, you want to stay active, reach out to these folks. And ladies, thank you so much for being here. To reach us, we're at knackforbusiness.com. That's NACK, the number 4, business.com. And use our chatbot to find out about more episodes. Just look for the question mark and just type in your questions or even book a call.
Everything you heard today is for educational purposes only. It's not professional advice. Before you act on anything, talk to a certified expert in your area. Your accountant, your lawyer, someone who knows your situation. We share perspectives. You make the decisions. Want more? Head over to blog.knack4business.com, packed with practical episodes on AI, marketing, leadership, and growth. No fluff, just the good stuff. Subscribe while you're there. Until next time, keep building.